Hello everybody, this is Nahaz, and men lie, women lie, but stats don't lie. Welcome back. Classes are over. I've got papers to grade, but the heck with it. I want to talk about Dota, and so do you. So I want to talk a little bit about the most recent couple of patches, 7.3 to 05. As you guys know by now, I'm not a big fan of a lot of the line-by-line patch notes analysis videos. I think they tend to get a little too long. And furthermore, when I think you have three patches like this that are very, very related in terms of what they're designed to accomplish, I prefer to talk about them as a whole. So I'm kind of going to give you the highlights. These patches were much more incremental in nature, particularly 7.04. I have the suspicion going forward that you're just going to see version numbers rather than say 7.04 as opposed to say 7.03b, which is what that patch most certainly would have been in the past. 7.04 in particular, 18 out of the 21 hero changes were simply continuations, either double nerfs or double buffs of what you saw in 7.03. So they're really not separate patches, and moreover, 7.05 was a continuation of some of the same, not necessarily individual hero, but some of the same global concepts. So again, I think it's just natural to talk about these patches as a whole, how they've changed the game, and how those changes may play out in the coming Kiev Major. One of the things that I'm talking about here, we saw a lot of examples of repeat buffs and nerfs. I think I did this count quickly. I think there were about 74 heroes changed in the three patches total. And out of those, half of them were multiple patch changes. So there were three heroes in particular, Abaddon, Lifestealer, and Monkey King, that were nerfed in all three patches. There were actually a number of heroes that were buffed in all three patches, and then a lot more that were changed in multiple of those. So when you talk about an individual hero's role in the meta, I think it's very hard right now to go patch by patch. You have to think a little bit about the changes. We've seen this in the past where, in particular, when IceFrog and the team want to bring a hero back into the meta, they have a tendency to repeatedly buff the hero patch after patch. Nerfs, this is a little bit less so, okay? And particularly when you see that a lot of these changes are incremental when you talk about talents, but in some, I think a lot of these heroes are going to play quite differently. In particular, the three that were nerfed. These are substantial nerfs, all right? Increasingly, we've seen a trend where the changes in these patches are very, very indicative and reflect the pro meta, okay? So I talked about after 7.03, I was thinking about this a lot and tweeted a number of things related to this. Never did get around to making a video, but if you looked at the 8 most picked Kiev Major qualifier heroes, and 9 out of the top 11, all of those got nerfed in 7.03, and the majority of those nerfs were actually substantial, as we'll see coming up in 2 slides. Furthermore, of the 20 least contested, least picked banned heroes in the Kiev Major quals, all but Skywrath Mage got direct buffs in 7.03. So IceFrog and the team clearly looking at pick and ban trends, much more so even than win rates. We're looking at pick and ban trends from the pro game. These are really dictating more than any other single factor which heroes are getting buffed and nerfed. In fact, Shadow Shaman, he was the only hero in Captain's Mode that was never picked across all 4 regions of the Kiev qualifiers, and he got the most substantial buff. Some would even call it a rework, with that very huge increase to his base damage, and he's actually even getting a little bit more of a change here in 7.05. So you look at 7.05, again, very reflective of what we saw happening at DAC. Of the top 11 most contested heroes at DAC, only Centaur, who was nerfed in 7.03 and 7.04, and Nyx Assassin, who got a little bit of a nerf in 7.03, they were the only heroes that were left unchanged in 7.05. And again, at the other end of the spectrum, of the 7 heroes available in Captain's Mode that were ignored at the DAC finals, 5 of those heroes got buffed in 7.05. Techies is the notable exception here. He got a nerf that it's pretty clearly aimed at quality of life in pub matches, where Techies can be a little bit annoying. Sorry Slack, sorry Waga. And of course, Treant Protector, with some substantial nerfs, was re-added to Captain's Mode. Welcome to 2-hour games there, folks. Eyes the Forest, you gotta love it. And 6 of the 10 heroes that were only picked or banned once, Doom probably being the most notable of these, but I actually think we're going to be doing a lot of talking about Lycan because of some of the other changes that we'll discuss coming up. They also got pretty substantial buffs here coming into the current patch. So again, you know, when you look at pro games and pub match stats, tend to play a bit of a role, but it's really pro games that are the most indicative in terms of what heroes are getting changed. Talents are increasingly playing a huge role in balancing. I have kind of an ambivalent feeling right now about how this is going because if you're reading patch notes, all right, the majority of the individual line-by-line changes are now to talents. And that's, again, these sort of line-by-line patch notes analysis videos, it's making it even hard to make one of those because if you've got to talk about every individual talent change by itself, you're going to be there forever. And this was definitely the case in 7.03. If you look, there were 66 heroes that were changed, and 40 of those changes were to talents only. There were 10 non-talent buffs and 16 non-talent nerfs, and it's pretty clear that the non-talent buffs and nerfs were the most substantial changes. If you look at, as we mentioned earlier, the 8 most contested heroes in the Kiev major qualifiers, they were all nerfed. They're almost all of them on this list. Centaur, Earth Spirit, Invoker, Juggernaut, etc. Okay, those are most of the heroes that were changed in the wake of the Kiev major qualifiers. Those form the lion's share of the non-talent nerfs. And you can see, I've also put asterisks here besides heroes that were not changed again in the following 2 patches. And you can see a lot of the non-talent changes were the heroes that were then not subsequently double buffed or double nerfed. So those are going to be, when you're looking at the patch notes, those are generally going to be the most substantial changes. Little bit of an exception to that, though, came in 7.05. Of the 40 heroes that were changed in 7.05, only 7 were purely talent-only changes. But if you look at a lot of the non-talent changes, they were things like Juggernaut's base movement speed reduced by 5. So, I mean, that is significant, particularly in the laning phase, but a lot of the non-talent changes were very incremental in nature. Invoker getting his base strength reduced by 1. So if you look at the really significant nerfs, Alchemist, the nerf to Acid Spray in the low levels, it's got a lower radius. It's going to really affect his ability to zone enemies' heroes out in the mid, especially mid in the laning phase. I think that hurts his 1v1 mid potential quite a lot. With Invoker, we talked about the base strength nerf being really on the incremental side, but I think Invoker is the hero that was really hurt by the Midas change. So Midas, the gold gain got a little bit of a buff, but the XP gain got a nerf. And that really hurts Invoker more so than every other hero. Again, if you look at pub stats from the previous week, these are off of Dota buff. You can see Invoker actually builds more Midas in pub matches than the next 10 heroes after him combined. Okay, that item at the pro level, it's become more of a support item, and Invoker in pubs, it's almost exclusively an Invoker item. This is really a change that is designed with that hero in mind, still being, even with the shift of the double Forge Spirits to a level 15 talent instead of something that's obtainable maybe at level 9 or 8 or 9. Okay, that's still a situation where he's the most XP dependent hero in the game. That really affects him a lot. Lifestealer and Magnus are the two nerfs, the 2 other nerfs that I think are really going to take effect at the pro level. Lifestealer has had his base damage reduced now multiple times. He also has had his skills weakened somewhat. Magnus, this last nerf in 7.05 was specifically designed around Empower and the fact that most Magnus strats were making such heavy uses of that skill. The mana cost is increased, and the mana cost gets increased for that spell, and the talent that gave extra Empower cleave damage was toned down a little bit. The techies changed again with you being able to hear the mines being primed. That's very pub oriented. I don't see that hero being a factor in the pro meta really going forward. The Earth Spirit and Monkey King changes, the Earth Spirit change is very small. The Monkey King changes are probably a little bit less significant than they look overall, but in both cases, they're very significant when you talk about the hero's early roaming potential. So Earth Spirit, the slow on his level 1 rolling boulder actually got cut almost in half, and Monkey King, his leap got rescaled at the early levels so that it actually gets less mana expensive now that it goes forward, and the slow is only 20% at level 1. So again, these 2 heroes, You saw them picked up at DAC and used to threaten, roam around, really threaten that mid lane, as well as put pressure on the side lanes throughout the laning stage of the game. That's going to limit specifically those applications of those heroes. And that's potentially even more significant now because, again, in the previous couple of patches, the length of the laning phase has been extended. So that early roaming pressure, potentially even more important in the meta going forward. Significant buffs. I do think Death Prophet got a pretty significant buff in her strength gain, as well as the changes of the last couple patches to her talents. If you think all the way back to 6.83, this is one of the only examples you're ever going to see in Dota of IceFrog and the team literally rolling back a change. At the height of her powers in 6.83, when she was in 6.2, when she was sort of a must pick, she actually got her strength gain incrementally reduced. That really hurt her in the mid game, meant that she had to think about building a little bit of early tankability rather than always go through that early Yules. Her strength gain is actually back to where it was pre 6.83 plus 0.1. So this is one of the only times that you're going to see IceFrog revert a change. Nature's Prophet, in addition to the global mechanics that we're going to talk about the next slide, he got a fairly substantial increase. 6 base damage is a lot. Affects this hero's viability in the laning phase. He can now do what you're seeing a lot of these pro teams run, where you help the offlaner a little bit early, maybe starting in a dual lane, and as the offlaner gets maybe even a little bit of an advantage, he's able to be self-sufficient because of that shrine, because of that camp, those camps located near his lane. Nature's Prophet, I think, is definitely back here in the meta, and it's going to be interesting, as we'll talk about, because really since the bounty changes being net worth dependent, split pushing has been very punishable in high-level matches, and I think IceFrog is bringing that element of the game back here. There are some interesting changes, 3 in particular that I wanted to point out to AA, Shadow Shaman, and Queen of Pain. There's definitely been a trend toward trying to emphasize these late-game talents, especially on certain heroes, and when you look at AA, the fact that in the late game, his level 25 talent is to make Cold Feet charge based, and the changes to Cold Feet, the damage and the cooldown now are both improved. Shadow Shaman actually gets plus 350 Ether Shock damage now as a possible level 25 talent, giving him one of the best, if not the best, spammable nukes in the game. And then Queen of Pain, she got her talents reworked to make Shadow Strike very powerful, potentially at level 25 on a very, very short cooldown. And that skill got individually buffed as well in terms of both its cast range and its damage per tick. So you're seeing, it's interesting to me how you're seeing some interaction. Not only are you seeing talents change the way that you approach balance in the game, but you're seeing some interaction between the talent changes and the other individual skill changes, especially in the case of these kind of reworked heroes, maybe heroes that are in a pretty bad spot, like Queen of Pain has been, sans the Blade Mail change. All right. So this is to me, the most substantial global change in Dota 2 that there's been for a while. And we've had a lot to choose from in the most recent patches, from the relocation of the Roche pit to all the map changes. Obviously, Roche is very significant, but I do think this one is up there. So the way it works now is that tower armor is actually dependent upon the number of heroes that are present within a 1400 radiant, within a 1400 radius of that tower. And this is probably the most significant direct buff ever to split pushing that we've seen. The way it works now, relative to previous patches, tower base armor is reduced by 6, but towers gain 3 armor per enemy hero within that 1400 radius. So if you have 2 heroes pushing a tower, towers are exactly the same as they have been in the past. But let's take a tier 1 tower, for example. You got 1400 base health. Towers also have the structure armor type, which reduces damage received by hero right clicks by 50%. So if you look pre 7.03, a tier 1 tower had 1400 health, flat 20 armor, and 50% extra damage reductions from armor type. So it had just over 6,000 effective hit points against hero right clicks. All right, it could tank 6k damage from hero auto attacks before going down. If you look at 7.05, starting with that base 14 armor and adding 1 for one split pushing, adding 3 for one split pushing hero, you get about 5.6k EHP. So a moderate reduction from what we had before, not huge in and of its own right, but maybe noticeable. The big change is the differential between the 1 hero split push and the 5 hero death ball. So that same tier 1 tower now has over 7.6k effective HP when it's facing a 5 hero death ball push. Towers are now 35% more HP versus a 5-man push than a 1 hero split push. That's a huge difference. The other thing that this does that may fly under the radar for a little while is it increases the importance of wave clear. Because if you ever get to a point now where only creeps are hitting a tower, that tower is going to take a lot more damage. That tower is going to take effectively like 20 or 25% more damage than it did before. That's a bit... all right, I probably said that wrong. I should have phrased it in terms of effective HP because that's what I'm using here on the slides. But you get the idea. The importance of multiple sources of mobile wave clear so you can get those lanes pushed. Really, teams are going to have to be a little more vigilant now about defending their towers from creep pushes. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say here. And I think globally, when you add all this up, it's going to bring split pushing in a much more meaningful way back to the pro meta. Again, in the past, what you saw was that the kill bounties and being dependent on net worth really hurt a lot of split pushers, Nature's Prophet in particular, that didn't have those great escape mechanisms, because all of a sudden, if your team is ahead and you're solo split pushing Nature's Prophet with all these items gets picked off, that's a huge bounty going in the way of the other team. I really like this approach because it feels to me like they're making split pushing a real sort of high risk, high reward. This is something that I give Cap credit for mentioning on Twitter. He felt like maybe even Radiance should have been nerfed a little bit more, because nerfing Radiance nerfs one of the safer ways that you can split push and apply pressure. And again, I really do worry that with the general buff to wave clear that we just discussed, Radiance may eventually need a slight nerf here in the upcoming patches. But I really do feel like by making the discrepancy based on hero auto attacks and rewarding individual split pushing heroes rather than the 5-man death ball, I like that kind of risk reward philosophy to balancing the split push, which a lot of people still talk about Datdota as if it's somehow inherently boring, but it really is an important part of keeping the pro meta interesting. All right, the other thing I want to talk about, of course, is that we have relaunched Datdota.com, our stats website for all things pro Dota related. If you head over there right now, you're going to see we've got the basic bare bones stuff up. There are a lot of features still coming. So one of the things that I've told a lot of the analysts about that I'll share with you guys is the idea of elo shifts per hero. So we actually will talk about our team ratings here in a couple of minutes, but elo shift is basically the idea that you're going to give a hero more credit for when it wins in an upset. All right, a hero that gets picked by one favorite team that's crushing everybody and nobody else uses it doesn't get much credit in terms of elo shift. A hero that is used by an underdog team to pull off a couple of massive upsets, that's going to be a hero that you see an elo shift very large. And as you can kind of see, I've looked at the stats here from DAC. Elo shifts can tell a different story when you compare to win percentages. So Visage, obviously a hero that's 8-2, and I believe the 2 losses were both by OG in the finals against IG. So this hero was 8-0, I think. And a hero that's 8-2 is going to have very strong numbers any way you slice it. But when you start getting down, for example, to the Crystal Maidens, to the Ember Spirits, right? You wouldn't necessarily 17-10, 11-7. Those are strong records. You wouldn't necessarily think, oh gosh, these are so much stronger than, say, Alina. But if you look at the teams that were using and winning with these heroes, they weren't necessarily the teams that were huge favorites coming into these games. So that gets a little bit upweighted, and I think that this can be a very useful way of thinking about relative hero power rankings, particularly over the course of a tournament. The other thing that you can start to do is you can start to look at the ELO rankings and the win percentages of hero pairings. So Slardar and Lifestealer, very, very powerful. Of course, most of these you're going to see are going to be positive because it's only heroes that are very successful individually that are going to be picked up a lot as a pair. But it was interesting to me that Monkey King actually didn't show up on the top of our overall ELO shifts. He does show up when paired with Lena, and that's very likely a team-specific effect. Notably also, Rubik and Centaur, the only pairing here that have a negative ELO shift. Those were the Centaur nerf, again, very telling, and that was pretty heavily punished by a number of teams that went against this duo. The other thing that I don't want to flame anybody else because, again, there are several good esports and Dota-related stat sites out there, but you do have to be a little bit careful. We do check our stats fairly carefully at Datdota. One of the difficulties that you're going to run into with other sites is that if you look at tournament statistics for heroes and players, you'll often find, for example, that all-star matches or these 1v1 matches that technically do get played on the tournament ticket, they'll make their way in and they'll contaminate the hero stats or sometimes even the player stats. Like you'll see player career stats, sometimes a couple of NEL matches or the like will sort of sneak in there in their career stats. We're fairly careful about that with Datdota. We have all of the leagues coded and tagged so that that's not going to happen. The Visage win rate 8-2 does reflect only individual matches. It's not going to reflect when Visage gets played, for example, 1v1 mid or in an all-star match. All right. The other thing that we can do that we've wanted to do for a while is start to look at draft phases. So if you look under drafts, there are some more features coming here too. But if you look at the summary, again, these are the same filtering settings that I used for the previous page, but just in case, you can just type DAC into league filters and Dota 2 Asia Championships 2017 will appear in the box and you just click it. You do have to make sure that the patch selected corresponds with the league. Now, we may automate this in the future, so if you pick a league like this that was only played on one patch, it might auto-select 7.04, but for now, you do have to know that. You have to make sure that the right patch is selected as well, or the query will come up empty. But you can now look at picks by phase. So not surprisingly, Monkey King and Lifestealer, the two sort of platinum tier heroes in the tournament, were picked almost exclusively in the first phase and did have very, very good win rates. As you go down, you can see the general trend. This had been true in the pro meta for a while, that the first phase tended to be core/utility biased with a lot of offlaners and the aggressive roaming supports getting picked up first phase, where second phase was where you'd see the majority of your support picks. So if you come down here to Rubik through Warlock, they were the leading second phase picks. Interestingly enough, Alchemist and Lena were actually the two most picked third phase here. And that's been true for Alchemist for a while. There are a lot of pro players and high-level pub players I've seen that have expressed a little bit surprise that Alchemist wasn't even more nerfed in 7.05. But Alchemist really has been showing up more at the tail end of drafts. So take that how you will. You can also, by messing around with some of these filters, you have to be a little bit careful because these win rates still in the current configuration of the site are overall. The win rates don't show up by phase by default, but you can, by playing around with some of the other filters, you can get phase-specific win rates for heroes. And you can also filter by team. So it can be interesting to see, for example, what's getting banned by versus against a particular team. You do have bans as well broken out by draft phase. All right. And finally, of course, our team ratings. This is going to show up on the front page of the site as well. You can get a little bit of detail by going into ratings overview. The numbers there may be a little overwhelming. There are a number of different rating systems that we do compare. The ones that we're going to be showing on the front page are typically going to be these Glico 2 ratings. They tend to look more or less the most reasonable over time. And you can see IG took over the top spot from OG by virtue of their victory in the DAC finals. One of the things that I like about ELO compared to that I like about Glico compared to straight ELO, which is the rating that 538 and a lot of other sites use for pro sports, is that in esports with ELO, you really have to be to get these ELO ratings to be stable. You often have to be a little bit aggressive about decaying ELO ratings over time for teams that don't play. It's a little bit easier doing those calculations for pro sports because you just kind of revert everybody to the mean in the off season. Because there's no real natural off season for a lot of esports, especially for Dota, you sort of have to revert ELO ratings for every day a team doesn't play. And that can result in teams like Liquid, who don't play for a while, dropping down to like, you know, 6th or 7th when we still think that they're pretty good. Okay. As opposed to Glicko, where instead of decaying the rating itself, there's an additional uncertainty parameter attached to the rating that you can just let increase over time, so that when they do play their matches, the changes are allowed to be a little bit larger. So it's a good system. Again, no one rating system is perfect. I encourage you guys, those of you who are interested in statistics, please go check this out. We are looking for comments. Please let me know either in the inevitable Reddit thread, in the comments below. You can email me directly. Any suggestions that you might have, things that you want to see about the new Datdota. We have a lot of features coming in the near term. I'm very excited about some of the new reworked item data, the frames data. I think you guys are going to really like. Just stay tuned for that because I think it's going to be really fun. Thanks again, guys, for watching. I hope you will tune in now that classes are over. I'm going to try to start doing these videos a little bit more regularly. And until then, this is Nahaz. Thanks for tuning in.